Just to set the record straight, overrated doesn't mean that a player is garbage. It just means that they've been overinflated than their actual value, or receive undue credit or praise than what they deserve. In 2013, at the age of just 17, Rodri was released from Atletico Madrid over concerns about his physical strength, and he made his first team debut for Villarreal 2 years later. But it took until the 2017-18 season, aged 21, for him to become a regular starter. That season was pivotal because the following season, Atletico Madrid took their chances with Rodri again for one season before he was signed by Manchester City. Man City were set back by multiple injuries at centre-back throughout the 2019-20 season, with Aymeric Laporta missing 15 matches in the Premier League alone, whilst John Stones missed 13, and Fernandinho played unnaturally as a central defender throughout the entire season. Rodri, on the other hand, was thrown straight into the starting lineup as a central defensive midfielder, often within a double pivot alongside Ilkay Gundogan, who would advance further up the field. Since joining Manchester City, obviously the percentages show that Manchester City are more likely to win when Rodri is on the pitch. In the 12 games that Rodri has been absent in both Premier League and Champions League fixtures, their win percentage is 45.45%. But context matters here. In their first loss to Leipzig, Guardiola benched Ederson, opting for Zach Steffen, who conceded 2 goals despite a decent performance. John Stones struggled defensively, contributing to the first goal by maintaining a high line with Kyle Walker, who later received a red card. The match was meaningless for Manchester City, as they had already qualified for the knockout stages and had shown defensive weaknesses, allowing 6 goals in 6 group matches. But the question arises whether the outcome would have been different if Rodri played over Man City's captain in Fernandinho, the ultimate defensive midfielder of his era. In the 2023-24 season, Man City experienced losses to Wolverhampton and Aston Villa without Rodri. In the 2-1 loss to Wolves, Man City were hit by a Pedro Neto fast break and conceded an own goal. Pep decided to sub in a washed Calvin Phillips at CDM for the last 25 minutes, and his defensive effort was largely responsible for the winning goal they conceded. The following 1-0 losses to Aston Villa and Arsenal in the Premier League were ultimately due to Man City's inability to score and convert chances rather than their defensive vulnerabilities. So the only real sample size we have to judge Rodri's impact on Man City is this season, where he's been sidelined with injury. But even then, I've already talked about how players like Foden and De Bruyne are not taking their chances. If they were converting their chances, as they did last season, Rodri's impact on the team would be less of a debate. We've already talked about the 2019-20 season, barely had a defense, conceded 35 goals, probably the worst defensive showing in the Rodri era, but still managed to finish second. But the following season, Guardiola spent 71.60 million euros to secure Ruben Dias from Benfica and Nathan Ake from Bournemouth for 45.50 million euros, which marks an improvement to the defense. Rodri was, in my opinion, wrongfully awarded the Ballon d'Or. This is how wide the skill gap is in the Premier League. Man City could have a below average defensive season and still win their 4th consecutive title. If Rodri was really this defensive midfield demigod, surely the team would have conceded much fewer goals. Declan Rice outperformed Rodri that season in terms of defensive numbers within an inferior team. And the same could be said of Casemiro, who played in 5 fewer Premier League fixtures. In part, you could blame Guardiola for replacing the departures of Aymeric Laporta, Benjamin Mendy, and João Cancelo for 90 million euros Josko Vardio. Rodri also gets a lot of hype for his progressive passing after leading the league in that stat. But despite the high volume of progressive passes, he ranked only 12th in assists and 66th in expected assisted goals. A significant amount of Rodri's high volume progressive passes were usually passes that did not result in goals. Contrast that with De Bruyne, who almost led the league in expected assisted goals, or a deep lying midfielder like Pascal Gross, who put up higher numbers in quality passes despite playing for a much more inferior team. But part of evaluating a player's value is their style of play. And for me, a superstar level, Ballon d'Or level player has to pass the eye test. They need to have the production, but also a style of play that's irreplicable. You can't tell me that Rodri's style of play is not boring or replicable. There are multiple defensive midfielders, or centre-backs for that matter, that could replace this. It works, but it's just not impressive. Nothing wrong with how Rodri plays, but it's just boring and replaceable. The last and probably most significant aspect to analyse Rodri is how well he performed in the knockout stages and finals of Man City's Champions League winning campaign, and compare that with his competitors. Starting with passing efficiency, which takes into account yards gained per pass, total pass attempts. First of all, 35 yards per pass is insane. Rice was obviously slinging it like a quarterback. Declan Rice obviously competed in the Conference League. He's there to keep the Arsenal fans happy. But Rodri just completely outperformed Modric's Ballon d'Or season in both yards and pass attempts. Rodri was a much better passer than all these midfielders in the crucial stages of the Champions League. When it comes to CDM efficiency, passing, tackling, interceptions, he's still not that far off from Kante, despite this perception of him being a weak defender. He's still impacting the game in a positive way defensively. CDM overall contribution takes everything into account. Passing and defense, all the key elements of a superstar CDM. Rodri absolutely destroys it in this metric. In the crucial stages of the Champions League, he was impacting the game in attack and defense, which is not an easy thing to do in a team and midfield as good as Man City. Modric obviously has a different role to Rodri, but even in passing, Rodri was a much better passer. As impactful as Rodri was, it doesn't take away the fact that Inter had plenty more goal-scoring opportunities than City in the Champions League final. The Ballon d'Or winning 23-24 season was far less impressive than the season prior, and he won the Euros with Spain, but only competed in the first 45 minutes of the final against England. Ultimately, the game of football is about scoring, and with that in mind, I still think it's unjust that Rodri was awarded Ballon d'Or over Vinicius Jr. Even his longevity and record with no major injuries is also an element of luck. The Rodri era at Manchester City has experienced fluctuations in defensive performance. On top of that, he racks up the stat sheet in progressive passes, but only a few of those passes have any potential for goal-scoring opportunity. But this season has proved thus far that Manchester City do need that defensive screen and insurance that benefits their aggressive style of pressing and possession-based football. Players like De Bruyne and Foden aren't having the same production as last season, so the impact of not having a stabilising defensive midfielder in Rodri is felt much greater.